Hello everyone. Welcome to session 7 on how to build a time tracker application with ReExt. I am Andres Villalba. I am a sales engineer at Sencha, and today I will be your guide. Before we start, I would like to remind you that we have all the previous sessions on our YouTube channel. Please visit it to learn more about ReExt, XJS, Sencha, or any of our other products. Today, we will be looking at the user grid. Take in mind that this is session 7. We have already worked with how to install and get ReExt running, how to create ReExt components, how to create the navigation for our application, how to set up the login form and session management system, how to create the admin grid, how to do all those REST calls to the backend, and how to theme our application. And today we will be working on the user grid. We will be looking at how to create custom data stores so that it's easier to update our application. Then we will be creating that user grid I was talking about. We will learn how to start and stop our tasks, how to auto refresh our grid, and how to look at the details for our tasks. Then we're going to test the application. We are still going to be missing a few features. We will take a look at them on the next session with KPIs and reports. And if we are still missing a few more features, we will take a look at them on session 9. So without further ado, let's start. If we take a look at our admin grid, we can notice that we have quite a bunch of stores there. Some that we want to use later on, and having them here will make it hard to update and maintain. So what I propose to do is actually have those stores on different files. And this is quite easy to do. Imagine that instead of having all of this inside of activity ID or inside status ID, we only add something like type status store. Something simple. That way we can call this same store later on. But how do we do that? Well, I already went ahead and created the first one. So let me show you exactly what I would do. I would go into my public folder, custom. I created a stores folder, and here I'm gonna put all my stores. So here I have that first store. The way it works inside XJS and ReExt is that I have to define a new class. I can give it any name that I want, but the standard is to use the application name dot stores, which is the folder name, and the same name that the file, so status. Then I have to extend from the basic data store, and I have to give it an alias that starts with the prefix store, and then I can give it any name. This name is the important one. That name is the one that I'm gonna be using here. So type status store must match this one over here. Then everything else is exactly what I had over here before I made that change. Okay, the autoload, the proxy, and everything else. If I wanted to do the same for activities, well, I can just duplicate this file, call it activities. Let's say activity store. Same deal over here, activities. Remember, this must match the name. And of course, I'm gonna look at this part over here. I'm going to replace what I have here. And that's basically it on the coding part. I need to call these files that I have here. In the current version of ReExt, all I have to do is to include them in the main file. But before I do that, let me just change here the type. So I call that activity store. Okay, now I'll go to main.jsx. And remember that on another session, I talked about the custom folder and the custom files. So as you can see here, I already have the edit window we created a few sessions ago. I have that status store that I just showed you. Well, if I have the activities store, I'm going to include it there, okay? And that should be it. And let's test it out. Okay, so now if we test this, we can see that the activity filter is still working now that we are using that external file, and same deal with the status. Now, if we go into options, add new, we can see that also here we were using the activity store. So one advantage of doing it this way is that I can actually use that same one. So I'm just gonna grab this type over here. I'm gonna go into that class, edit window.jsx, and I'm going to look for the activity. Now, instead of having all of this, I can just have type activity store. Okay, and same deal with the status when we are working with the status store. Okay, we just have to make sure that the name does match. Okay, and if I wanted, I could have created another store for the user since I have two different stores with the same thing there. So let's actually go ahead and do that too. Gonna say users. Gonna call that, like I said, users store. And over here, what I'm gonna get, it's exactly what I had here. So let's copy that and put it right there. And that store type, it's actually going to be just user store. And let's do the same thing over here. And before we go and test, remember to go into main.jsx and add that store there. So users. So if everything has been set up correctly, we can just go in and check the add new window. And as you can see here, we have all the options available now. Okay, so now that we have apparently our admin grid ready, we should go ahead and create our My Tasks grid, okay? Since that one is empty. Of course, what most people would say you should do is just copy everything and go into user grid and just paste that there. But let's do something different instead. So what I'm going to be doing, it's also creating my own custom class. So over here, I'm just gonna create the task grid, and I'm going to bring everything that is in the admin grid into an XJS class. Doesn't have to be that way, but this will make it easier for us if we want to update both grids at the same time. Let's say this is going to be custom task grid. And of course, this is going to extend from the basic grid, which is xgrid.panel. Then we're going to have a title there. I'm going to say my grid for now, actually task grid. And then I'm going to be bringing everything that I had inside the config into that class. Everything here. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste here. Of course, right now I have duplicated the title. That's fine. Let's take that out. Now let's include that task grid into my main.jsx file. So over here, I'm just gonna say task grid.jsx, and I'm gonna add a next type for this. I'm gonna call it task grid. Okay, now I'm gonna reference that here, task grid. Let's test that out. And as you can see, it's still working, although this is the new title. So I'm just gonna say here title.props.title. And as you can see, now I have that title. The advantage of doing it this way is if I want to create that user grid, well, instead of referencing that panel as I had it there, I'm just gonna reference that task grid again, okay? And that way I will have both panels created, although they are going to be exactly the same, only the title changes. But now I can start working with this and just apply the changes that I need. Instead of having two separate panels, I have two panels that extend from an existing one, making it easier to update, okay? So let's just change the menu once again. If you remember, I had that one inside navigation here. So I moved a few things around. Last time I moved the admin tasks to the beginning just to make it easier. I had the dashboard located in the middle. So it should actually look something like this. But since I'm gonna be working on my tasks, then I should rather have my task at the beginning for now. Gonna move that one at the beginning. Okay, so let's see what's going to be different. This is going to become a little bit more complicated, nothing hard to understand, but I'm going to be doing some things to choose between the admin and the My Task grid. Let's actually activate that refresh button and add a few more buttons to the right. So let's close all of those. I'm gonna keep the main grid open. And I have that button that does not do anything. So I'm gonna add a handler there. And what I'm gonna do with that handler, of course, it's just refresh the grid, which basically works like this. I'll get the grid just like I did with some other button. Then from there, I'm gonna get the store. I'm just gonna say load. Then after doing that, I'm going to add one more button. This one will be used to start the tasks. So I'll just say start task, and I'm gonna give it an icon. I'm gonna give it a style. Let's call this start task button. And I'm gonna add a handler to start my task. Okay, let's just leave it like this for now. And of course, I'm just gonna say that the button, it's a play button. Then I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna add a stop task button. And I'm gonna use a different style, which is a stop task button style. Let's go to our CSS file. And if you remember, I have these styles over here. So let's create our buttons. I'm gonna say that those are pill buttons. I'm gonna have my start button, start task button, copy that. Let's paste it over here. Basically, I'm gonna use something similar to what I did before, but instead of having it in as a blue colored button, let's actually have it as a green colored button. And let's also add the inner style. Let's get this name over here and put it in here instead of the my button name, and same deal over here. And when there's a mouse over, I'm just gonna turn it into a lighter color. And let's test that out. And this is how this looks. That's the start button. And let's do the same with a red color for the stop button. So I'm just gonna copy and paste. Of course, I could do this some other way by having a main CSS class, but for now, I'm just gonna do it this way. I hope you don't mind. I'm just trying to be fast. Let's use that name, which is stop task button. Okay, so now it looks like this. That's basically the main idea. And since I'm going to turn that stop button into a menu bar, I'm going to do it like this. So basically what's going to happen is that the icon that indicates this is a menu, right now it's going to be gray. If I add this line, it's going to be white. So let's go to our stop button. I'm gonna take the handler out of that one and I'm gonna add a menu there. Okay, and the first button is just going to be pause stop. The second one is going to be finish task, and the last one is going to be cancel. Let's just say this. So task options. And instead of this, I'm going to add the bars. Okay, I can also have icons in those menus over there. So let's say stop, finish and cancel. So flag, checkered. Now let's just put times there. And so it should now look like this. We are also going to show a timer that refreshes the grid every given time. For that, I will put it here on the right. So let's do that. Let's add something right at the end. So after that arrow that we had, we're gonna add another button. So I'm just gonna say timer for now, and we're gonna do something here. Okay, that's going to be later. For now, all we have is just some button there. In reality, this is gonna have a countdown timer. So as you know, those two buttons shouldn't be on the admin task, only on the actual my tasks. Why? Because the admin task shouldn't be able to start and stop a task, while the my task should. So let's fix that. So this is what I'm going to be doing. I have to give those buttons a name. So I'm gonna be using item ID, and for this one, I'm gonna call it start button. And the other one, also gonna give it a name, and I'm gonna call it options. Okay? I could have used an ID, but since I am using the task grid for both the admin and my tasks, this has to be unique. That's gonna cause a conflict. So instead, I'm gonna be using item ID. So any component can have a constructor at the end. We talked about that on another session. So in this case, this is called init component. Okay, and we said that there we need to call the original method, which is called with this called parent, and then we can navigate through all its items and change whatever we need. So over here, I'm gonna get those two objects, those two buttons, and I'm gonna check if I'm inside the admin grid. I am going to take those buttons out. If I am inside the other one, the my tasks, I'm gonna keep them. So I have to make that difference. So in the config for the admin grid, I'm gonna say grid type admin there, and inside the user grid, I'm gonna say user tasks. Okay, now with that, I can check that out over in our task grids. So over here, I can check if this grid type it's equals admin. I'm gonna hide those buttons. Otherwise, I might do something else. So I'm just gonna keep it as an if else. So over here, I want to get those buttons. So it's a good idea to get them in a variable. So I'm gonna get the toolbar. For that, I'm gonna get this object, which is the grid down toolbar. Let's say that I want to hide the start button. I'm gonna get that component. Have to specify the item ID name, which was start button. And I'm gonna say set hidden true. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for the options button. And if we go and test this, you can see that under my tasks, I have both buttons, but on admin tasks, I do not have them. Of course, they are still there, but they are hidden. Let's see, what else are we missing? Oh, over here, sorry, I forgot. Should be button. That's the object we're getting there. Okay. Okay, now what we want to do, we want the user to select a task, any task, and here on start. So we have to also make sure that task is selected. Okay. If there is a task selected, then we can start it. Okay. Of course, that option that we have here is hiding the selection. We'll fix that in a few minutes, but for now, let's first see how we can get the selected row so that we can start that task. When we click on start, we're going to block this button and we are going to activate the task options button. Afterwards, we're going to do the opposite. If we pause the task, then we are going to allow to start again. If we finish the task, we're not going to allow to do either one of those. Same deal with cancel. So let's do that. Let's start the task by getting the correct selection. Okay, so let's get that selection. Right here, I have the start task button. Let's get the grid. So as you remember, this receives the button. So I'm gonna get the grid the same way that I did before. Okay. And now I have to get the selection model. So let's say that selected record here, and that's going to be under grid. Get selection model, and we can get the selection. What this receives, it's an array because we can have more than one record selected if we change the selection model. So I'm gonna check if the selected record has at least one element and just make sure that you don't have any typos. Okay, if you have at least one element, then we can use that one to start the task. So I'm just gonna type a console log here so that we can get that first element and see exactly what it has in it. So let's try it out. Let's select one record and hit start task. And this is what we have. Okay, we have the whole object, but what we want to look at is the data. Here's everything that that record has. So what I'm going to be sending to the backend, it's actually the task ID. That's the one I need. Okay, so I'm gonna get from that selected record the data and then the task ID. So let's do that. Let's say that the task ID is selected record element 0 dot data dot task ID. Okay, now with that, we can make a call to the backend so that we can start the actual task. So I'm just gonna say ext ajax request, and we already did an ajax request for the delete button. So we're gonna do something similar. So I'm just gonna take that and put it right there where we were at. Okay, so we have our URL. We can send it any method that we think it's best, but I'm not gonna call edit task. I'm gonna call a different method. And in this case, it's a task status. Sending the parameters as post, and here I have the task ID. And also, if everything is a success, I'm going to reload the store so that we can see that the task has changed its status. Okay, and apart from the task ID, I need to send some other things. We mentioned this before, but I didn't do it last week. I have to send the user ID and I have to also send the token so that it validates the session. And we also, in this case, I need to indicate the status ID. So in this case, I'm going to be starting the task, and to start the task, I need the ID of 3. So let's get the user data. If you remember, we had that method that we created before, and from this one, we are going to get the user ID and the token. Well, we got to get that method from the grid. If you remember, I was also using get user data somewhere else here, so I also have to make sure that happens there and there. And why is this method on the grid? Well, I haven't actually done that. If you remember, I had that method over here on the admin grid. Well, I can just pass that method over here. So I'm just gonna say get user data is this method. So I'm just referencing that one. And I have to do that on both, on the admin grid and on the user grid. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And of course, this should be over here. We're not actually passing the method, we're actually just sending the data. So let's just search for that and take that out. Let's try it out. So let's select one task, okay, and hit on start. And now it says in progress down here, okay? That wasn't my task. I was able to select it because of two reasons. I'm not checking that on the backend, which I should. And the other one is I should only be seeing my own tasks. So let's also change that. To make sure that the data that it's on the my task grid and the admin grid, it's different, we should modify the store for that grid. So the first thing I'm gonna do is that I'm going to add the extra params property. Inside of it, I can add any parameter that I want, for example, user ID, and I can put the value 1. Of course, my backend is prepared to receive that user ID. If I do it that way, instead of getting all the tasks, I will only get the tasks related to the user 1, meaning myself. But that will happen on both grids, and that's not what I want. My backend is ready to understand the value of 0. If it's 0 there, then it's gonna get all the tasks, okay? So instead of doing it hard-coded this way, I'm gonna add a listener. The listener, basically, it's an event that can be applied to most XJS and ReExt objects. So the one I'm gonna set up here is called before load. This one receives the store, okay? And it also receives the options. And inside of it, what I'm going to be doing is modifying this call. So inside the store, I'm gonna get the proxy, and I'm going to set up those extra params right here. And the process is the same. I can say user ID and set up the value of 1. Okay, as you can see, I'm again getting only the tasks that have to do with myself. So now I have to see how to change that value. The way I'm going to do it is I'm gonna go all the way to the bottom where I have my init component, and I'm gonna add that user ID to my store. There are several ways to do this. I can actually do it inside the store, something like this, and inside the load method, put the user ID here, but I'm not gonna do it that way because that would require me to modify all the load calls that I have here. And something else that I have to do, I have to take out the auto load method. I don't need it anymore since I am going to be loading the store directly. So I'm gonna say this get store load. This will load the store explicitly. Now, I want to set that user ID. So I'm going to do it the easiest way that I can think of. I'm gonna get the store and I'm gonna say user ID. That's my own parameter. And I'm gonna send the user ID that I have under get user data dot ID user. And that's the one I'm gonna send, okay? I could send more parameters if I wanted to, but that's the one I need. Okay, so on the admin panel, actually I'm just going to send a 0, and on any other type of a panel, I'm gonna send the ID user. Okay, and now that I have the parameter there, let's go back to our store And instead of having one there as the value, just gonna say store.user ID. And if everything has been set up correctly, it should work. So let's see. My tasks is only showing my own tasks, and admin task it's showing all of them. So that's the way I would do it. That's how I would check between one or the other. Of course, just like we did with the other stores, we could have taken this one into our own custom class over at the custom folder. Okay, so now that we're up to this point, now it makes more sense to actually start using the play and the stop buttons. Okay, now let's look at those buttons. We already created the method to start the task, but we have to do it also for stop, for finish, and for cancel. So instead of just copying and pasting, we can create a method that does just this for all of them and maybe just receive this as a parameter. And that'll be simpler and easier to understand. So I'm gonna create another custom class and I'm gonna call that task grid controller. A controller is a class that can be linked to any view and can have methods related to it. So I'm just gonna define the classes there. I'm gonna call this tt dot custom dot task grid controller, and I can send the parameters inside of it. First of all, this is going to extend from ext app view controller, and I have to give it an alias name. This is the way that I'm going to be connecting the view with the controller. So let's say I'm just gonna call it task grid controller. And this name, I'm gonna grab it, I'm gonna bring it to task grid, and here I'm just gonna say controller and the name of it, okay? And there I can have any methods that I want. For example, I'm gonna create a method that connects to the backend and changes the stats. So let's say change status, and it's going to receive the status ID, okay? The task ID and the status ID. And then instead of having it this way, I'm gonna take everything that is right here, okay? And I'm gonna put it here. And now there are two ways to do it, but now I'm gonna be calling that method from over here. So I'm just gonna put the name of the method here. And of course, before we forget, we must also include that controller inside our custom files. Okay, once we have it there, we can make sure that it's linked, and to have it linked correctly, it should be just the name without the controller dot. If I do it this way, this is gonna send its own parameters towards the actual method. So I can do it this way, but I will have to change the parameters here, or instead I can just have the function here and make that call myself, something like this get controller. Okay, but that's gonna be a lot more steps. So instead of doing that, let's do it the way we were planning to do it. So this is gonna be calling that method over here. There's no button, as you can see. So to get the view, actually, instead of this, what I'm going to do is this get view. This will refer to the controller, and get view will obtain the link view. These parameters over here are incorrect. We are getting the button and the actual event. We will need to send all the other parameters some other way. And the one we need is the status ID, because the other one we are obtaining it from the actual selected record. What I'm going to do is just add that status ID here. I'm just gonna say 3 because that's in progress. And inside the controller, I'm gonna check that button and its status ID. So something like this. The case of the other buttons, I'm gonna establish their own status. Okay, so let's copy this, paste, and paste, and paste. Actually, this is calling the same method, but now we're gonna get a different status ID. Let's double check if this is working. Okay, so let's test this out. If I grab a task and I hit on play, that's gonna change into in progress. And if I select that same task and select pause, the task is gonna be paused or stopped. Let's grab another one. Let's start that one. And then let's try selecting it again and let's finish that one. Okay, so it should be working now. But the only problem here is, well, two things. I'm actually being allowed to start and stop tasks even if a task is selected or even if it's not assigned to me, and that shouldn't be happening. So that's something that I have to fix. The other thing is if a task is not in progress, I should be able to hit on start task. And if a task is in progress, I should be able to either pause it, finish it, or cancel it. Okay, so let's go and change that. For that, I'm gonna disable those buttons depending on what I am selecting. For that, I need to add an event to the row selection. So let's do that. So I'm just gonna go into my grid again, and I'm gonna add a listener. So let's add the property listeners, and let's put one there. The listeners are all documented in our Sencha docs. So if you want to find more about any of these listeners, go ahead, check the docs. So for now, I'm gonna add the select event. Okay, this receives the actual object, then the record, the, the index, and some options. Okay, and with that, I'm going to deactivate or activate the buttons depending on this selection. Okay, I am also going to add another event which is called deselect, just in case nothing is selected. Okay, so basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to deactivate those buttons. So let's get the actual status. So to do that, I'm gonna use the record property. I'm gonna get that status ID. Then, since I am inside the grid view, I'm gonna use this down toolbar to get this toolbar over here. And then I'm gonna get the component. Which component? Well, both of them. First, the start button, and I'm gonna disable that button. We'll see how in a second. And the other button I'm gonna get, it's the options button. Okay. How am I going to disable it? Well, the first button, which is the play button, is going to be disabled if right now I'm using the in progress action or if the task has been canceled. Okay, in both cases, that button is going to be deactivated. And when am I going to deactivate the option button? Well, that one should only work if I am in progress or the task has been running for some time. I'm going to deactivate every time that it's not in progress or that it hasn't started, okay? And what about deselect? Well, if I find a way to deselect the grid row, well, then always I'm going to have those buttons inactive, okay? That way, I can make sure that those buttons are not useful. As we start, those buttons should have been disabled too. Why? Because I don't have a row selected at the beginning, so they should be disabled. So let's take a look at it, and it will look something like this. Right now, those buttons are not enabled. If I click on a task that is not in progress, I can start again. And if I look at a task that is in progress, then I can actually pause it, finish it, or cancel it. So let's stop it once again. Okay, this will depend on the logic of your application. For me, this is how I like it. Just also make sure that if we hit on play, as you can see, we lose the selection. We should either select the row again or deactivate the button because the button is still active. So for now, because we don't have a lot of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deactivate the button. So I'm gonna go back to the grid controller, and whenever I hit on change status, any of those buttons, I am also going to deactivate the buttons. Okay, that way the user won't make the mistake on clicking on any of them. So let's start task, and as you can see, I lost both buttons. Stop, and I lost them. So far, we're making it work. What else should we be doing? Well, we talked about the timer up on the top. We also should be able to see some details for this task, so we can do one or the other. Let's start with one of them. Okay, let's work with the timer. So for that, I'm going to be using a task runner. So inside my controller, I'm gonna create two parameters that are useful for me. One is the actual runner, which by default will be null. And the other one it's a counter, so I will call it timer counter, and that's gonna be 0 for now. Okay. I'm also going to create two methods. One to initialize the timer, and the other one to stop the timer. Actually, to stop or start the timer. So let's name it accordingly. Okay. Now that I have those two methods, I will go back to my view, and over here, I'm gonna get the controller, and I'm gonna call that init timer method. And here I'm gonna set the interval. Every 5 seconds, it's going to refresh the grid. Of course, in reality, I would put 60 seconds or something higher, but for now I want 5 so that I can keep on testing. So init timer is gonna receive the actual interval, okay? And now what I'm going to be doing is setting up that timer. So first let's get the controller. I'm in the controller, so this is it. Then I'm gonna get that timer button, which I would do by getting the view, then the toolbar inside the view, like we have been doing before, and then I'm gonna get that component with its component ID. Let's say that it's called timer button. I haven't set up that item ID, so let's look for that button and let's give it an item ID. Okay, and then I'm going to start the runner. For that, I'm going to be using an utility called task runner. Of course, I could have used just basic set interval or set timeout from JavaScript, but right now I want to use something from ReExt. So that's creating the runner. Now I'm gonna start it. Okay, it receives one object, and inside of it there's two parameters. One is the callback method that it's going to be called every interval, and the other one is the actual interval. Right now that's gonna be 1000 milliseconds or every second. So every second I'm gonna check if I meet that interval that I was sent as a parameter, then I'm gonna refresh. This might be getting a little bit confusing and you may say, why didn't you set it up like this? Well, because in the button, I'm gonna display the amount of time that I'm missing before refreshing. So I'm gonna say, put something here. And that counter also that I have here, I'm going to be adding to it. So let's do that over here. Me.timer counter, and I'm gonna add 1. And as the text, I'm just going to say refresh in, and I'm gonna add the interval minus me dot timer counter. So that's gonna show 60, 59, 58 if it's a whole minute. If it's only 5 seconds, of course that's only going to show 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when the timer reaches 0, I'm going to refresh the view. So I will do that with me get view, get store, load. Okay, and also, of Of course, I'm gonna set that timer counter back to 0. I'm sorry, this is greater than the interval, this interval that we received here. Gonna call it refresh interval just to have it as a different name and make it a little bit less confusing. And before we test that out, let's make sure that we don't have any typos like this other one. And let's see if it's working. And as you can see, it says refreshing 4, 3, 2, 1, and it refreshed and it's restarted. Okay, so let's now add the start stop timer. So let's go back to our button and I'm going to add a handler. And I'm just gonna add the handler name as a string that will make sure that this method gets called. And now let's actually stop it. So I'm gonna get the controller, then I'm gonna get the button again, because I might need both of them. And then by using the runner, I'm gonna stop all of them. Okay, that's not all that I'm going to be doing, but for now, let me just explain it this way. So let's say that the refresh is paused. Okay, and let's test it out. And it's running. You're gonna see that it's going to refresh as usual. And now I'm gonna hit this, and it is paused. And it will continue to be. The truth is, whenever we start a runner, we will get a timer ID. And when we stop it, we will lose that timer ID. So let me show you how to check that. So before stopping, I'm going to add an if statement. If me.runner.timer ID is different from null, it means I got a timer, so I will stop it. Okay, otherwise I will start the task again. However, there is something to take in mind. If I do it this way, I would have to put everything back in it. So why don't we do it a little bit different? Let's say init over there, and here I'm just gonna say if init is true, then do that. Okay, otherwise just start the task. So if I go back to my method over here, this one is going to be initialized, and the other one, instead of doing this, I'm gonna call meet init timer. Once again, I'm gonna say the 5 seconds that I have in the refresh interval, and I'm gonna say false. I don't want to restart. Okay, I could have said the refresh interval somewhere, so let's do it this way so that it makes more sense. Say 60 for now. And when I get it here, I'm also going to save it inside my controller. Okay, doesn't matter that this one is referring to either one, but that will help me to actually use it here. And if we go ahead and test this, we got the timer there, it will refresh, and if we click on it, then the refresh is paused. If we click again on it, it will run again. Usually when we have a button like that, we want to do something a little bit different too. We want to reset the timer counter. So first, I'm gonna reset it. And second, I'm also going to force the refresh. So if I start the timer again, the grid is going to reload and it's gonna start again. Okay, so 4, 3, let's say that I stopped there, it was under 3, I clicked on it, it refreshed and it's back in 5. Okay, simple, right? So now we have that button and we have our grid ready. So what's next? Well, we should be able to see a little bit more detail on our grid. So I'm gonna add another button at the end that I'm going to be using to actually show the details for the task. And also I'm gonna take out those two buttons for my tasks. To hide or disable those buttons, we are going to do it in a simple way. We have the action column, which contains the edit and the delete button, and there we're gonna add a method that it's called is disabled. This method receives several parameters. One of them is the grid table, then the row index, the call index, the action, and the row. So we can disable buttons if we want to, if we check the row value. For example, tasks that have been finished cannot be edited or things like that. But for now, what I'm going to be doing, it's just disabling the buttons whenever we are not on an admin task. So for example, if I say return true, that button is going to be enabled. If I say return false, that button is going to be disabled. So what I'm going to be returning here, it's from the grid table. I'm going to obtain the actual grid by doing upgrade, and then I'm going to check the grid type. If this is different than admin, then the icon is going to be disabled. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that also on the trash icon. Okay, let's test that out. If I'm looking at my tasks, those two buttons are disabled. If I'm looking at admin, those two buttons are enabled. And I am doing it this way once again because both grids are in reality the same. If I was working with two different grids, I could have just taken out those buttons. Now, what else do we want to do? Okay, let's turn that refresh button back to 60 so that it's not refreshing all the time. And now let's add one more button at the end. That one will let us see the details of this task. So for that, I'm gonna add one extra button right at the end. So we have the edit button, we have the trash button, and let's add an extra button at the end that I'm just gonna call view task details. In this case, this one is always active and something is gonna happen there. Of course, I am going to create a new window, but for now, let's comment that. Just like we talked about before, I could have my very own class inside custom, but I'm not gonna do it that way today. We don't have much time, so basically I'm just gonna get the raw data and then I'm gonna create a new window, but this time I'm gonna create a basic ReExt window. Okay, gonna give it a title, gonna say details. Then I am also going to give it some size. Let's say that it's 500 pixels width and a mean height of 600 and a layout of fit so that whatever I put inside of it occupies the whole box. I'm gonna say that this is a model window and let's see if that's working. If I click on it, I get that window. Okay, what I'm gonna be putting here, it's a grid with the details. Okay, so let's actually make it a little bit wider. Let's add a bottom toolbar with just one button that it's gonna say close, and the handler it's just going to close this window. So my window dot close, and that's all we have right now. Now I want to create the grid, so let's create that grid inside of it. So I'm gonna say items, and I'm just going to have that one item, which is the grid. And inside of it, I'm gonna add some columns, and those columns are the ones that I have on my database. So that table, if you remember, it's task tracker, and basically all it has it's the task ID, the user ID, start date, end date, and the status ID. Let's see how that works. Okay, We do have some notes, but we are going to be adding those later. I don't think we will have enough time today. I'm gonna have the first column, which will have the title user. Okay, so we have the user, which comes from the data index full name. Okay, I'm gonna add a basic width of, let's say 200 pixels. And let's copy and paste to get a few more rows. So I have the user, then I will also have the status, which will be just coming from status, and that's gonna be shorter, let's say 120 pixels. Then we'll get the start date, which will come from start date. Actually, let's say that it's a flex of 1, and this one should also be a flex of 1, and this is going to be end. And here I'm just gonna put end date. And at the end, I'm just gonna add notes. Okay, let's see what else. Okay, we have this. Let's see what's happening. Of course, this is far from done. We don't have a store right now, but let's see if that window gets the columns that we are expecting. There they are. Okay. Now let's add that store. So I'll just put it inside the grid. Say store. Okay. And I can add everything here, or I can create my own custom store once again. So I think I'm gonna just put it here for now. It'll be faster, at least for today. So basically, I'm just gonna copy the store that I have over here, and I'm going to put it inside my new store that it's here. Okay, yeah, it's going to be remote sort, remote filter. Actually, let's change those so that you see how it works if they are not remote. The property to sort by, it's going to be task tracker ID. In this case, it's going to be descended. I'm also going to be sending the user ID, and I'm also going to be sending the task ID. Okay. And let's see. And we're gonna get that from here. Okay. And instead of getting it from get tasks, we're actually going to get it from another endpoint. In this case, get tasks events. And of course, we have to give it the autoload option here. And it should be working. Let's see if that's the case. Gonna refresh. And let's see if I check that one out, I can look at the details. So over here, I can check which was the user, what was the status, and from what time to what time. Okay. So I think that will be all for today. There's a lot more than we have to do. For example, we have to check what I mentioned before, that I can only start or stop the task if I am the user, not the admin. Okay. So in the next session, we're gonna finish the user grid, and we're gonna take a look at creating our dashboard and how to export. Okay, so thank you, and let's move on to our question and answer session. Okay, so I would like to remind you to leave a question on the question panel. We have a few minutes before the webinar is over. I hope you are enjoying the session so far. To tell you the truth, it's been fun preparing all these different webinars. And the time tracker we are building is something that I have seen used in some companies, something similar. So I'm trying to replicate that. Let's see, next week we're going to be working, like I said, on finishing this application. So that's going to be the last sessions. I remind you, please leave questions here if you want me to include something specific on our last webinar. Okay, I'm seeing some questions, although most of them are going to be answered on the next webinar. like how would I check on the permissions, and how would I separate the user, admin, the admin, and sorry, I don't understand that. I'm guessing they're asking if an administrator could have their own task ID and the user could have his own. Yeah, we can do that. However, I plan the time tracker to just have that one grid. What else? Oh, somebody's asking me to see more details on the details window. Yes, that's also something that I'm going to be doing on the next session before we move on to the dashboard. And I'm not just going to show the grid, I'm also going to show some data like the amount that it's going to be charged to the client because of the hours worked and things like that. So please don't miss it. We're going to be finishing that application. And well, I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and I'll see you soon. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.